I was speaking with someone this afternoon who's choosing to become Jewish, and we had a little calendaring snafu. And she said, well, I didn't want to bother you this week because of all the things going on in the Jewish community. And I said, what makes this week different from any other? Unfortunately, right? And that's kind of our ironic, or I guess it's Jewish humor, right? Where you have to laugh at the rough spots. You, like me, have probably heard or voiced some of these words speaking about the rough spots. Someone said, I'm seriously considering taking the mezuzah off my door. Or I'm worried about sending my children to Jewish camp. Or you've heard someone say, I avoid attending large gatherings of Jews or Israel supporters. I heard someone today say, my daughter turned her Jewish star necklace around for one of her interviews. I also got sent to my inbox the classic, in quotes, watch this video, it's very frightening. I'm afraid to let anyone know I'm Jewish, someone said to me last week. You can understand the fears after the murderous gunning down of Israeli diplomats in D.C., the horrific incendiary attack in Boulder, the relentless assault of invective against all Jews from too many so-called pro-Palestinian protesters that incite violence. How can someone say globalize the intifada in this country? There's much to fuel our fears. So despite the fact that so many of our prayers and songs include the very words, Al tira, lo lifached, don't be afraid. To say, don't be afraid, is kind of like saying, don't think of an elephant. You just thought of an elephant, didn't you? Merely saying it, in fact, has the opposite effect. It brings it all, swells up in our brains. The question, though, I have to say, is not whether or not we are afraid. The essential question is how are we going to respond to the real fears that exist in this world? So as I investigated different sources to share words with you today, I came upon, cited in a Jewish source, some really compelling words from Buddhism spoken by the Dalai Lama. Now, Tibetans, they know fear. Chinese oppression is real and ever-present. So the Dalai Lama, in the essay, describes two types of fear. The first is that fear associated with panic and anxiety and worry and distress, and he classifies those as negative emotions. Not only because they're unpleasant, but because it's often based on a form of unrealistic thinking. A thinking that sometimes exaggerates the risks, where the fear becomes debilitating almost, and it can sometimes lead to rash behavior. That fear is called afflictive fear. Let me say it again. Afflictive fear, that debilitating, freezing fear. And the Bible is actually filled with warnings against that kind of afflictive fear. You remember the story of the golden calf. The Israelites are gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up to the mountain. He's gone. The Israelites are without a leader. They're gathered at the base of the mountain. They become anxious and lost and afraid. And what do? They commit the ultimate sin. They create a golden calf and they start worshiping an idol. Afflictive fear has hazards. It brings on the sin of idolatry, the text is telling us. Violence against Jews, understandably, invites afflictive fear. Rabbi J. Michelson, writing in the foreword, the Jewish newspaper, the national paper, he explains why that kind of afflictive fear is problematic. He calculates the odds based on the number of anti-Semitic incidents in the past year that ADL has tracked and the number of Jews in the country at being about 1 in 800 that you will be involved in some kind of a violent anti-Semitic act. Not unrealistic, but also relatively unlikely. He contrasts that to the likelihood of being killed in a car crash. 1 in 95. Now, pretty good odds for Vegas or the lottery, But nonetheless, many of us played Vegas, not all of us, and most of us don't buy lottery tickets. But with 1 in 95 odds, you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive home tonight, and you're not going to think twice about it. Although I might have just ruined your drive home, sorry. But the fear of terrorism leads to thoughts like those I shared when I started, those expressions of fear that people want to take mezuzahs off their doors, they won't attend Jewish gatherings, they're afraid to be Jewish. So the Buddhists say there's another kind of fear. It's a fear that contains a powerful element of wisdom. Now, it's not diminishing, it's not denying the danger. It's a real awareness of the dangers and a knowledge that does warrant caution. When you get in your car, you're going to put on a seatbelt. Because we know that without a seatbelt, that 1 in 95 chance probably reduces itself to 1 in 25. That fear that has wisdom in it can also be unpleasant. But the emotional torment, the intense anxiety, the irrational reactivity, that can be consciously excised from our thoughts. The experience of fear using wisdom leads to careful planning, leads to reasonable precautions, and it invites thoughtful responses. I'm currently teaching a Melton course to WISE members on the history of anti-Semitism. Material from that course and my own knowledge of Jewish history, my own studies of Jewish history, helps to put my fears of American anti-Semitism in context, in the larger context of centuries of Jewish experience. Now, it would be foolish to say, don't be afraid. That's clear. But balancing a knowledge of historical precedents with a real analysis of the circumstances in this country can help us manage those fears with a certain degree of wisdom. Wisdom, in our uncertain times, absolutely leads to the conclusion that inaction, not to do anything, would be a huge mistake. We would be derelict of our essential responsibilities. But overreaction can handicap us unnecessarily. Rabbi Ron Stern of Congregation B'nai Jeshurun in New York City interprets God's interaction with Abraham and Sarah at the beginning of the book of Genesis as an invitation to all humanity to manage our fears. After Adam and Eve have eaten the forbidden fruit, they're afraid of God's wrath. They know it's wrong. So as God looks for them, God says, Ayeka, where are you? And Rabbi Madeleine says, that question isn't because God needs to know. But God wanted Adam and Eve to become aware of where they were morally and spiritually. Ayeka, God's question, was about self-discovery in the light of fear. Where are you? Ayeka. Where are you in your life? Where are you in your relationships with those who think differently from you? Where are you in your world? How will you manage your fears? Ayeka. So I say to you, Ayeka, where do you want to be? Where do we as a collective want to be in our response to this frightening world? Where are we in response to anti-Semitism on our college campuses? Affliction or wisdom? Knowing that no other ethnic group in this country has benefited as much as we have from the American university system, what is the wise way to manage the challenges we've faced in the past couple of years? Where are we in our response to the vitriol and violence against Israel? Affliction or wisdom? How do we uphold our Jewish values even as we fear for the well-being of our people? Where should we draw the line between legitimate criticism and anti-Semitism? Ayeka. Where are our Jewish organizations in their response to the real threats facing Jews in America? Affliction or wisdom? Who truly speaks for us nationally and locally in ways that thoughtfully further Jewish security in this country? Ayeka. Where are we with those who can be our supporters? Affliction or wisdom? We have many, many allies, not just the woman shouting on the side of the street at the march in West Hollywood. Everyone is not against us, Though I have heard some people say, everyone is against us. We know that's not true. Many of those people who are with us are our own non-Jewish or converted spouses or the spouses of our children who have chosen to be a part of the Jewish people, who love Jews. How will we continue to gain strength from those important allies? So, no. I can't say, lo lefached, al tira, don't be afraid, like you might say to a child who's afraid of the dark. I can't say that. But I can say, paraphrasing the words from Proverbs 3, where al tira actually comes from, through wisdom, you need not be in terror. Resourcefulness and foresight will give life to your spirit. So let me end with Rabbi Madelon's words. We can work with our fear so that we will no longer allow it to bring us down and cause us to hide or flee, but rather harness it to open us up to the questions we need to ask ourselves. Harness it to become more aware, to expand our vision and our capacity for compassion and love. Harness it to reset our priorities and to do what is right and good and just. Amen.